get the recording. That sounded weird. Um, can folks hear me? Oh, great. We've reordered the sequence of some of these trainings to pick up four-part series that we're starting today. It's about the topic that a lot of clients eventually get relationships. For folks with serious mental illness or substance use or very fractured. And I'm going to talk about this in the context of couple relationship or sessions applies to heterosexual couples and gay couples as well. Today on in general on relationships and a way to conceptualize how to work on relationships can work with your individual client on developing some of these skills to help improve the relationships. And 2 weeks on sexual identity and sexual orientation, but just around sex and relationships and how to talk about these topics. Because that I'm aware of, nobody in the Central Valley. Um, After that, we're going to talk about a concept of putting trust in relationships, particularly when trust has been shattered through either mental illness, personality disorder. One we're going to talk about is reconciling with your family after sobriety. Many people who have alienated children that they were not prepared to raise. And so it's really hard for them to go back wreckage left behind in those relationships. And this is a way to talk to folks who've been in recovery about with trust building and with an eye to reconciliation with family members right now. Then in April, which is the final month, we're going to talk about cutting edge treatments for modulation. We'll talk about biofeedback and we'll talk about EMDR. So that's the rest of our employees or want to come back and take different ones of these again. We're going to run it on a much more, we're going to start the series over again next October. So I'm going to start sharing my screen and share the PowerPoint for today. It's build and maintain successful relationships. Again, I think after symptom reduction, this clients start asking us is how do I deal with relationships? So a reminder for BHRS camera on, mute yourself if you're not speaking, and most importantly, please don't drive. Vaping or smoking, and I don't mind if you eat or drink. So the learning objectives for developmental milestones. There's lots of models of how families and some of them are specific to heterosexual couples because some modifications for same-sex couples. And I about this in the context of a couple. Whether they're married or not is immaterial, but it's a couple who are intent on skills are transferable to other dyads. For instance, two super good adult child dyad, because a lot of these skills are around communication and trust. So I think that these skills are transferable. The treatment method I'm going to talk about, I trained in this method in the late 1990s and then again went through the full training program in their training method. And it's really for increasing communication relationships. They have they have a training center down in Southern California where they have to come just be in the apartment for the weekend and they're observed and they're rated on different things regarding complimentary to each other. Are they complaining about each other? That experimental setting in the last 30 years. It's really an amazing love action, in particular, divorce rates at about 95% accuracy based on model for helping clients learn how to develop and sustain. Voice or in the chat. Let's talk about relationships. What struggles do your clients concerning in their relationships? We're talking everything from the picky minutia to like instead of those challenging relationships. So think about it for a minute and put in the chat people talking about that annoys them in the relationships or starts pulling the relationships down.
I noticed that,
Sarah?
yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Sounding odd. No, you can hear it normally. I'm hearing it odd. So Sarah, go ahead and comment and then we'll process it. Thank you.
What I would report that they feel like they haven't been heard. So there translates it differently. So they're not either whenever they do speak, they're focused in the conversation or the other partner is just receiving the information a different way.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So it's communication. It's about being heard, communication skills, lack of empathy, being partnered with somebody or being in a dyad with somebody who doesn't have much empathy, substance abuse. Are you invested in the relationship or are you invested in your job for your relationship needs instead of with your partner? All kinds of things, very challenging. I'm surprised that people stay together, honestly, with all the environment where productivity requirements are very high, commutes are long, and the relationships. I'm going to minimize my screen right now and go back to the PowerPoint. And just relationships are not necessarily linear, but like childhoods, and we kind of teach it in a linear fashion. But I like to think of it as a spiral that goes up and goes down, back, and stay stuck in a phase or a developmental stage for. So there's developmental models, but they're not necessarily linear. Success from a psychological and a physical health perspective. this research is successful relationships live longer, they heal quicker, they have lower blood pressure, better immune system when they're injured or have an illness or disease. So there's tons of help to figure out how to have a successful relationship, even just looking at it from psychological and mental health benefits to successful relationships. People in successful esteem, greater empathy, improved trust, less stress and its effect on the body, fight or flight, and get cortisol and adrenaline dumps in our system, which are not healthy for us over the long term, stress all the time, which is hard to avoid again in our life. And even with our own best efforts in our own relationships, sometimes it's hard to. First one is you cannot change your partner or their behavior. I hope everybody knows this at this point. You can often will come in saying, I want my partner to do this, or I want them to stop doing that. And one of the things but we can only help you change your own behavior and your own responses to that person's behavior. For 25 years is most disagreements are never fully resolved. If you come child rearing, money, sex, that kind of stuff, the disagreements are not going to be fully resolved. The goal this year, I mean, for 6 months, but the goal is to help people increase their psychological and emotional their conflicts in the present moment. Yeah. Really. I literally just excuse me. I'm sorry, I can folks' comments. So please put your comments in the chat because then I can read them. And bizarre, it sounds like you're underwater. And I'll check the chat periodically. Um, the third, more positive, or a much greater number of positive interactions than negative ones. A lot of people think to one, you have to have 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative interaction. Or pennies in a jar, jelly beans in the jar. You've got to actively work on positive actions with you to saying, oh my gosh, I really appreciate that you did this for me, or I'm grateful for that. Snap at our partners, or we're having a bad day and we can't focus on them, even when they want to talk interactions. And finally, successful relationships require ongoing work. You've got to learn to build trust. We need to understand forgiveness and what that really means. It doesn't mean it's about in a few weeks. You got to have a sense of humor about it. You got to have some agreement work. Successful relationships in particular take ongoing work and insight, either individually as well as a couple. So which of these relations, put in the chat, surprising to you, or perhaps the most annoying to you? Because it is annoying to learn that you got to work hard at a relationship. Which relationship truth is surprising or agreements are never resolved? Yeah, I had to learn that. I kind of knew that. Well, our partner wasn't, we weren't resolving. We were just renegotiating. And flexibility renegotiation as well. So that seems to be okay. So going back to the PowerPoint, and they have different names, but they're essentially these 5 stages. Together, you get dopamine drops because you love being together, because you have this, until you start having to deal with some of the downsides of the relationship. Then there's these differences. There is the stability stage where you've been able to negotiate frequently when people build a home together or they have kids together, but they feel that they can go home and talk to their phase, which is a strengthening of the stability phase. And then there's the co-creation or a household or other things in the community that you might decide to. So the romance stage, I think most of us are familiar with. It's the intense attraction phase. You can't wait to be with them. You talk to them for hours on the phone or in person. You are looking, it's called falling in love in, in most cultures. It's a time of bonding and connecting and touch during this phase in many cultures, but recognize that touch is different in different cultures at different phases. So it's the everything is good stage, I like to call it, because there's a denial of differences of mates as flawless. This is the one, this is the ideal. And we don't go. And talking to a colleague one time about this concept, she said, yeah, it hurts for you. She's like, you don't know who doesn't squish the water out of the sponge at the end of washing the dishes, that to know if you're going to be a potential mate. So she talked about how do you uncover those flaws. We develop fantasies in our head of who this person is and what this relationship, your partner or the person you're dating is also doing that process. And you guys aren't sharing other without sharing that information and engaging in fantasy work about that relationship without paths that are not mutually helpful. Um, Especially the bond and folks who have dated or who have been in love, remember, I hope you were, your body and your brain were also helping you develop that bond. And this solidify our bond and our connection. So anywhere from 6 months to 18 months phase. The next is inevitable, which is a power struggle. There's disillusionment. Differences and flaws become more visible because they should be, or it interferes with daily living. So this is the phase in which the relationship, and there's really 2 main tasks in this phase. You need to establish One early conflict I had with my partner is that I do. We've had a conversation about that. And part of that is cultural, and part of that is because it was just like, what's the matter with you? You can't get it. Even when you have 2 hours to get ready, you're not on time to go. And it's time to ask her, are you ready to go? And she'll say yes. And then she'll go to the bathroom, and then she'll get a sip of water. Things we've had to negotiate over the long haul. The other one is the other big task is so you're not fused, even though that might feel good in that romance stage. You've got and for all of that to mesh together. So that's a big task, and it's a big phase because there's a lot of work to do. So what happen tasks effectively is they engage in ineffective methods to fix the relationship, to change the other person. So we want to focus on my partner needs to be on task to say, well, how can I change myself to make this relationship work through this phase of relationships? There's also a development. The flaws come out and the disillusionment comes out, and we tend to focus on the problems. Working well in the relationship, we're trying to fix our partner, and we get into the cycle of saying they want to. This is always going to be this way. Well, I don't like this. This is a bottom line for me. So we have that kind of language use. And sometimes people give each other ultimatums. If you don't do this, I'm going to relationship in this way. So that frequently leads to relationships breaking up. Another dynamic. So maybe one person needs to take a step back and their partner will take a unconsciously communicating, I need to step back for a minute. And maybe this person's afraid, well, if they keep chasing the other person, and that's not a helpful pattern. And then push the relationship toward unity too early before the other partner is willing or thinks that a couple or an exclusive couple or whatever terminology they want to use. And typically folks who the other person isn't ready. And so, golly, don't we even see this on TV and in movies, some of these relationships? Well, a high percentage of couples don't make it past this stage. So it's under a lot of conversation. And I find the clients that struggle with it never learned how to have conversations. We don't talk about relationships this way. Maybe your mom said relationship takes a lot of work. So folks don't have these skills. And so they keep trying and what they do people. And it fails at the same point because they haven't learned the skills they need to get through that developmental stage. And see if there's questions in the chat or observations in the chat so far. Are these patterns seen in friends, family, television clients, movies, etc.? Yeah, I think so. Next stage, once you get through the power struggle stage, you do have a sense of stability and you've had to accept a lot to get through that power struggle stage. So when this is, my partner is always going to be like this, or who I've been dating, going to change. And so, do I accept it, or is it a deal breaker for me? At this stage, inside and out, emotionally and psychologically, and hopefully, you can't get to this what you value. Um, one of the I have like the 5 things couples come in: money, sex, child rearing, and basic values. And those are all very challenging things to negotiate. But those who are able to do so my partner's never on time. And now that she's been retired for a few years, now she doesn't even understand, like, that's how it works in mental health. That's how it works in academic way. I don't know what I'm doing today because she has the freedom to not have to schedule because she doesn't work. She's even got this now different conceptualization of time and time to do this activity and this much time to do that. She doesn't think that way. And so this is or I beat my head against the wall because I know she's not going to change. So I've developed respect for her pattern of tell her when I need it to flow differently from me. That's how we've come to agree on it. Threatening or catastrophic. It's not threatening to the cohesiveness of the relationship. This is part of long-term intimacy. Um, I'm not going to break this relationship up because low level issue for us, but for some couples, that's something that can get real. Couples counseling who had a partner who was a list maker and very high couldn't get past that because she felt that behavior it was a heterosexual, and he felt that she was not respecting his need to have order in his life. He saw her was to help them work through this challenge. Again, you're not going to solve it, but you've got to figure successful. People who are in the stable phase of relationships respect each other and learn autonomy and competency and self-esteem and love needs and other needs and a desire to help. Or the couple, it's about you and your partner and the couple. So there's that perspective. As increases, passion and intimacy increases. So there's a direct correlation between the need for each other and what you bring to the relationship and the increase in passion, intimacy, and sexual activity. That can take a long time in relationships. If you can get to that phase, people tend to stay in that phase for a long And I think people cycle through successful couples and learn from each other and learn from the relationship because our context kids grow up, your kids go to school, your parents age, your job changes. With really huge context and background against which people engage in relationship. We move out of stability sometimes because of things we don't have any control over, like a partner is ill, taking care of her, and then you move back and forth between commitment and recommitment and stability and maintaining phase. There's a much better balance between togetherness and autonomy. So you've grown on the skills you learned in this person and what they bring, but you value their personal space and your personal space and their independence and you see in the relationship. So there's a respect and gratitude and space giving as well. So many couples, so many individuals come to counseling about the relationships and this commitment phase is kind of the opposite of that. Sometimes couples have to live apart. They work opposite shifts because of child-rearing needs and family care needs. Off across the country to take care of a family member, or you've got to go to Mexico to deal with a family issue or financially. The commitment stage, that's not a threat anymore. You willingly give space to the other person to do what they need to do. There's increased acceptance for differences. And it's not just, okay, we're grudging on this issue we're not able to resolve, but you start working for win-win outcomes. How's this going to work is not quite a resolution of the never-ending conflict, but there is much more of a focus on a win-win, be in the relationship. And all through our relationships, you say, yes, I want to be in this one, but this one is a very deep, the stability, because I have this commitment, I'm not going to leave it. So the commitment's a really genuine commitment, despite any challenges that comes. And so there's acceptance, so it is easier to resolve some of those ongoing conflicts for longer periods of time at this phase. There's synergy here, which is like the sum is greater than its parts. The power of the union is greater than the sum of its parts. It lets you not have to think so hard, much more about how can I contribute to this relationship in ways that are meaningful. Only 15% of couples reach this stage. And I try to think of couples in the community that I can't have the conversation, but I want you to think about couples in the community, in your community, who have hit this phase of co-creation, whether it might be your parents, your grandparents, Jimmy and Rosalind Carter. They were a couple that clearly were at this phase. The Obamas, as a public couple who are at this stage, who figured out how to work together. They worked out everything from gender roles to, my goodness, how are we for decision making? And the Carters did something similar. So take a second. And what were the qualities you observed in that couple that leads you to think they got to that co-creation stage? There's in the Obamas. So, conflict resolution and the ability to support when the other person, a sense that there's protection within that relationship, factors that the Gottmans measure as one of the key to do that. Continue thinking about that and dropping your examples in the chat. My partner and I met, but she talks about her grandparents at this stage. They had 14, but my partner always talks about the respect her grandparents had for each other. And they were so very much a more traditional Hispanic family, but they had great this out in front of anybody in the family. Nobody ever knew when they had a disagreement. The local farming community, not the church. They kept their stuff private, and I know that's a cultural each other in public. I think that was the big thing. And bless you, Amber, for your sneezing. Absolutely, absolutely. So these are things that couples do when they've got see signs of it in the stability of the commitment phase, but it's absolutely part for their family and having figured out how to work through those conflicts and the challenges with communication. Point. And I want you to think of a spiral versus a straight line with these stuck in one. They might zoom through others, one step forward, two steps back. Once you get a phase, couples do tend to have more stability and continue to work on the stability and commitment phase. The couples you will see in counseling are in the power struggle phase, but they've fallen back into the power struggle phase. And so it's really important to remember, and I'm going to go back, the two main tasks of that phase, which is to establish effective ways to resolve conflict and allowing their partner to do the same. You tend to see people trying to fix each other, trying to control each other when they're in their power. If these are familiar to you, I'm going to move through the chat and talk about Gottman couples. I'm going to not going to watch today in class because you really have to watch the whole video, and they're both about 30. So John Gottman did a TED talk about the whole understanding of what them and what he does. And when I practice, and I'm certified in the Gottman Method, how he can predict divorce rates based on those questionnaires. So he talks about the whole thing and how they did the research they work on specifically in counseling with couples. There's a phenomena that the end times, and it's four bad things that come along that kind of blow up the world. We're going to go over those in a here. It's not what blows up the world, but it's really what blows up the relationship. Blog, the Gottman blog, which is a well-run and very trusted blog, and they have a practitioner. It's about 20 minutes long, and she talks about what the four horsemen are and what the antidotes. The four horsemen of the apocalypse are criticism, contempt, defensiveness. Probably are engaging in two or more of each of these. So criticism, if you can see the criticism when a client starts saying you, so they're always, you never, right? So that's going to be a criticism, and it's about the person and who that person is. Again, it's the minutia that kills relationships because we haven't where you never come home from work on time, that kind of stuff. So instead of attacking the problem, attacking the person level, more hostile is contempt. So this is insulting or psychologically abusing your partner. Yeah, and you will hear much stronger language than that. You're a piece of shit, you're a bitch, whatever language, and or psychological abuse. So gaslighting, following people, they're no good, that kind of thing. And you frequently will see this in criticism. The next one, these kind of come in pairs. Criticism and contempt can tend to go together in defense. When somebody attacks us through criticism or contempt, we get defensive and self. But it's taking the victim role and projecting the blame onto your partner. So it's about XYZ. You frequently will take on a victim role. Well, I do this because you don't bring the blame on the partner. And we'll talk about the antidote to defensiveness and then a higher level or withdraw to avoid the conflict, not just to convey, sorry, I don't like you, I don't want to talk to you, I don't want to deal with you, so you just get the silent treatment, or somebody withdraw. Apocalypse from Gottman's perspective. I need to check the chat. So when I wrote that in an assessment or couples counseling, so there's specific California laws around because very few of you do couples counseling at BHRS, although that is possible for some of you that are very straightforward in an assessment. If you're seeing the couple doing criticism with partner and struggles to mitigate that criticism with a gentle, appropriate try, right? The client deals with partner's criticism by harmful to the relationship rather than just withdrawing so that they don't get into or avoid the argument. So that's how I would write that enforcement. And they sound easy, but they are hard and they're a lot of work. So the antidote to criticism theory behind this is that behind every criticism is an unexpressed need or an unfulfilled need. I have a need that's not being met, and I'm projecting that onto my partner rather than being a technique called a gentle startup, and that's what we're going to practice today in this seminar for your partner and find gratitude for positive actions. So if you phase, both of those are about appreciating your partner, what your partner brings to the relationship, and that's what heals contempt. And if a partner in a couple is already engaging in contempt, it's unlikely that that relationship would mitigate that contempt and do your best to, I call it lowering the heat in the verbal abuse or the psychological abuse of their partner situation as well. So you might need to do some safety planning conversation, culture of appreciation for your partner, really in your heart, beginning to appreciate your partner and finding gratitude for your partner's same thing with defensiveness and stonewalling. Once a person's gotten to stonewalling where they've checked out to be harmful to the relationship, it's really hard to turn that around. It's easier to deal with defensiveness. Defensiveness is taking responsibility for yourself and accept your partner's perspective, even if you don't agree with it. So we need to appreciate our partner's perspective and not just our own. So there's that mutual, and sometimes that means apologizing. Apologizing means I didn't understand this issue as to you. I was only seeing my perspective, and I'm sorry for doing that. I still and I need to find a way to for us to have some common ground here. That's an apology. Stonewalling again is harder. You have to interrupt people when they stonewall. The doctor clips on your tip of your finger to see your pulse and your blood oxygen levels. I have Gottman trained pulse counseling because if your pulse gets over 90 beats a minute, your prefrontal cortex has shut your flight and your prefrontal cortex can't logically process information. So when people start to engage in psychological self-soothing, so you need a plan for what you're going to do to self-soothe when you want. In couples counseling, we just take a break. We take a 10-minute break. Or find a distraction. If self-soothing isn't working, you need to find a distraction. Again, go for a walk. Physical activity will help with that fight or flight anyways. Do jumping jacks, do something. So those are the antidotes to the four horsemen. I'm going to go back to the rooms and ask for questions you have about this conceptualization. Okay, I'm going to come back to the chat a little bit later. But what I'd like to do is give out to criticism. So, what you do, either in individual counseling or in the couples, have a situation they want to address with their partner, and remind them. I do education too, as we're taught there's an unmet need. So, assist them in framing the need or identifying the need behind the complaint, indicating what the need is. When this thing happens, I feel a particular way, and I need have to avoid blaming and saying you need to, because that's going to kill it because of criticizing again, right? So you need to interrupt the criticizing. It is helpful to construct the I need section in a positive language. So it's not the app, whatever it is. You need to say what they want to have instead in that situation. So here are some examples. So when the situation, I feel the need behind the criticism. When I come home and the kitchen is a mess, I feel overwhelmed. Okay. So you can identify what's the situation. The person comes home from work and the kitchen is a mess. There's a little bit of the housework to be done, the dishes to be in the dishwasher before I come home. You notice they don't say to be creative. Maybe the kids can help. Maybe, maybe they're the one that has to do it. But you avoid that blaming or criticizing language. Money right before I go to bed. I feel agitated and cannot sleep. I need to schedule another time of day. So again, what is it? Talking about money right before they go to bed. I feel have these conversations another time. Okay. This one was the third. Really annoyed when you're not ready to leave on time. I need to know what will help you be on time. So I didn't say, oh, the when is when you go to events. I feel annoyed. Um, I need to know what I can do to help. So those small groups, let me look at the time. We're going to take 10 to 12 minutes to do this. Take one from a client. Frame or understand for yourself the need behind the complaint. Use this framework for I feel, cite the feelings, and I need what they want instead. Avoid blaming and saying I need to. Action in positive language and be specific and indicate what you want instead. So because my sound is down, one example from each group at the end of the group. So we will take 15 minutes for this and put their own example, but I want the group to decide on the best formatted and clearest example. Going to I'm going to leave this up. I'm not going to stop groups. Let me try this. Nope, I don't have to stop sharing. Let me put you so before people in a group. So please accept the group in the chat so everybody can see it. Okay. I think everybody's back from their rooms. Take a minute to post in the chat a good example from your group. I'm thinking you didn't have enough time to do this activity. We might do it again next week in the context of, I'm sorry, not next week, in 2 weeks. Um, we're doing. This is good. When I am not heard, I feel frustrated. I need validation and understanding. Excellent. Very, very short, to the point, and is not blaming. High school student who's having issues, not being open to communicating with her and just shutting down a disagreement. Um, when I cannot understand you during a conflict and I'm being ignored, I feel disrespected. I need more honesty, openness, and willingness to move forward on the same page. Excellent. Right. Very clear. Says what the person needs. Great example. Very good. This this you can also use these with two other adults. Usually, I try not to do it with parents and not adult children because there's already a power differential between them. You really need to use this with people that are on similar footing with each other. um, when you use your headphones when I talk, I feel ignored. I need to feel heard and have your attention when I speak. Boy, oh boy. To the point, very clear. Another one, when I take all the responsibility of setting up our kids' appointments, helping with homework, etc., I feel overwhelmed and not supported with these tasks. I need more support for you by taking some of these tasks on. So it's again saying specifically what they need. I need more support from you, and that's okay. It's not telling them I need you to, right? Which is a problematic formulation. So great for groups, for great examples. What we're going to do in 2 weeks' time is talk about sex and sexuality in relationships. And that's also going to include talking about what mental health medications interfere with sexual activity, either with erectile dysfunction or with other issues around that. Libido, the sexual desire, is another one that's really impacted by some very common psychiatric meds. So I don't like the timing of this training because it's right when you time to go home. So I'm always going to end about 10 minutes early so you all have time to go home. I hope to see you in a couple of weeks. Do watch those Gottman videos. They're really good and they really explain this concept in a lot more detail. So I hope you all have a good 2 weeks and I'll see you again later.